asked a great question. The love question, as we called it. He added some context about how culturally they tend to hold back a bit emotionally. And imagine how people would react if you started talking about love. So his question is, how do we stretch the thinking of his staff teams and other organizations and commissioners to think about love in how we provide and commission services?
A lovely question, Jason, and one I perhaps with some sense of. I spent 6 years in the UK during my PhD and the first pieces of work there, and so there are some cultural differences in terms of expressions of it, perhaps. But I think the experience of it, I think, is very human and common. We just may have different ways of showing it, or how we've drawn boundaries around what is appropriate or professional. So, starting by asking some of those questions. In some of the work that we did in the UK, some of my favorite moments were when we brought people who were really unusual together. So we bringing folks, social workers, and folks that had been in the system for many years that they'd always seen as a client, but bringing them together for a dinner where the relational dynamic wasn't one of client and worker or expert and worker. And so you intentionally set up a space where you didn't need to import or bring in that. You were coming in as equals, as conversation partners or dinner mates or those sorts of things, and how in those settings that provides fodder for some really good reflection and reflexivity of when we change the names of things, when we change what we call our roles. How does that change the language we use, the questions we ask, the ways in which we listen, what we're listening for? And so, how can you use these kinds of moments to start to build up a repertoire of what does it feel like to be engaging in that way? And generally, my experience when we create these kinds of disruptive moments is that folks feel much more liberated and free, that it actually feels very constraining to have to always be thinking as a worker. That actually is a false divide. And so when you can loosen that for a moment and begin to think about how would we start to bring in a different set of boundaries and borders between our relationships and roles, that can be one step to having that conversation at least.
Yeah, it's a great question too, and I know that there is like a growing body of research that does look at things like the role of love in social care and relational ethics and other sorts of things that tries to reset relationships from sort of transactional ones where you're fulfilling a role for a certain purpose or end that is usually articulated by a system, to entering into the mystery kind of a relationship, which actually comes probably with different sets of imperatives. And I mean, in some ways, I think systems have done a really disservice by not allowing people to show up as their full selves and requiring them to show up in particular roles. I think there's also some real moral and ethical difficulties that presents, or challenges that presents, and harm that presents, not only to the people we're supporting, but to ourselves as practitioners. And but knowing as well, though, that love, I think, can be a profoundly destabilizing force for systems, because love makes its own requirements of you. The relationship that you have with that person places its own demands, and you have to respond to that. And that moral act, or that love act, can sometimes fly in the face of what systems are requiring you to do or expected to do, and so on. And it's unpredictable, of course, in those moments, because those are deeply contextual moments and deeply relational moments. And systems require more predictability and consistency. So all this sort of say is, I don't know how easy or how ready it's going to be to retrofit systems to incorporate love now as sort of a new legitimate kind of dynamic. At the same time, there's a thirst for it, and there's a readiness, I think, and there's an opportunity there.